Hey, it's me, your favorite artist you're obvious to subscribe to. Every beginner anime artist has a dream, and some of those dreams are to make their very own anime. It is a common thing for artists to put their OCs into a fake anime scene to see how they would look if they were actually animated. These are always a fun thing to see, but in some cases you can see that some people don't really understand what makes anime look like anime, and they usually just draw their usual style in their drawing scenes. Now, I'm not telling you what you can or cannot do, it's your art. I'm just saying that if you're going to try to mimic the style of another person or industries to pass it off as theirs, you should at least give it a try to understand the elements that they use in their art. Anyways, let me explain what I mean by style, because it is a little confusing to explain. By style, I don't specifically mean the art style. Every single anime has a different art style, and you can easily make yours look like it's from an anime. By style, I instead mean the techniques and elements that studios use to create these animations, such as the tools they use, the processes and standards they must follow, the types of lines or colors they use. You'll probably understand more as we go further into the video. So in short, today we're going to explore the way anime studios draw their animations, and we're going to be trying to mimic the style at the end. Holy shit, my new plushie just came. Oh my god, I can't fucking wait to unpack this, dude. Oh my god, I'm so excited. Holy shit, dude, she's so fucking cute. I gotta use the bathroom. I'll be right back. I've partnered with Makeshift to make a plushie of my OC Crimson, and she just looks absolutely beautiful. However, these plushies are very limited and are only available for 21 days, and we also need to be able to make a certain goal so that they can even be made. I would love to see this character become a reality, so I would be super ecstatic if you could support the release of her. She's absolutely precious, and I have no idea why you wouldn't want to sleep with her at night. If you want her at this moment, but you just don't have enough, check out my Instagram bio for a discount code. She's only going to exist for 21 days before her face gets completely wiped off from the planet. So try to get it as soon as you can. Only you can save her legacy. Thank you so much, and let's get back to the video. Animating an anime is a very time-consuming process. A 20-minute episode animated at 12 frames per second can consist of over 10,000 frames. That's a lot of work for just one episode, let alone an entire season of 13. And hiring the talent needed for a production of that size takes a lot of money. Cyberpunk Edgerunners, for example, had over 200 professionals work on the show, and out of those 200, around 70 were animators. Kazuya Matsumoto, a producer from Studio Trigger, said that it takes around $340,000 US to make a single episode. Plug that math into a calculator and you can estimate that it takes a lot of money just to animate a single episode. Although it could be cheaper because they don't pay animators shit. These reasons are why the art style in anime is kinda simplistic. It's to save on resources, money, and time. If you made an anime with full-blown illustrations for animation frames, it would probably be super beautiful, but you probably would have died before its release date. We're going to be analyzing the art style of modern anime and how you can try to replicate it. To effectively examine the art style of modern anime, I'm going to go through the 7 elements of art and talk about what anime studios do for each one. Lines in art terms are defined as a point that moves through your canvas. Lines can be used for displaying emotion, motion, shading, and most notably contour, aka line art. In anime, lines are mainly used to display the outline of shapes and objects such as people, clothing, muscles, or feet. In production, they are also used to show where shading and highlights have to be placed. This is so that colors can move consistently and don't appear wobbly in the coloring draft. After the sketching phase, animators usually use a vector layer, shape tools, and small standard circle brushes to line the frames. In a standard 1080p frame, which most modern animes use today, I found the average brush size to be about 3 to 5 pixels depending on the art style. In terms of line variation, lines in anime are typically static, meaning that there is little to no variation in how thick a line is. If there is a huge amount of line thickness, it was most likely created by smaller lines and it was filled in during the coloring stage. Typically though, simple line work is favored because it's just easier to draw. You don't have to worry about if you have dynamic lines, you can just focus on how your shapes look and if the movement of your objects flow well. This is actually where I got the idea to make what I call my basic brush. It allows me to focus more on the shapes and composition of my sketches rather than having to worry about making the lines themselves look pretty. This is very important when it comes to anime production because remember, the goal is to be as efficient as possible. We can't worry about stuff like line variation, but stuff like that doesn't really matter in animation. Next on our list is colors. You know what colors are, I don't really think I have to define that. I'm not going to be talking about color palettes because they can range greatly from anime to anime, such as Dragon Maid's vivid and bubbly colors, or Death Note's grim and depressing color scheme. What is important here is how anime studios choose what colors they use to highlight and shade with, since that is consistent among many studios. In illustrations, the preferred technique in shading is to pick a darker color that differs in hue, value, and saturation. You typically want a color that's more purple in hue, more saturated, and darker in value. However, in anime, that's not really the case. There are two methods I've found when trying to understand what most studios do. You can either pick a shading color for each color individually, which in that case, the way you want to go about it is to pick a color directly below the base color, and unlike illustrations, you don't move the hue a lot. The downside to this, though, could be that it takes a lot longer since you have to find a shade for each color, and you would have to make an individual layer for every color and shade. The more common way I've found, though, is to find a universal shading color, make a multiplied layer over the base coloring, and fill in the shading. This universal shading color will usually be dependent on the environment you're working in. For example, in default daytime, the most common color to use is bluish gray. This is why some of the shading you find in animes can appear kind of dullish in terms of coloring. There's fewer vivid colors because sometimes the multiply color just doesn't really work well with certain colors, but it's easier just to shade everything in one layer. It's pretty much the same for highlights, it's usually just a white with its opacity adjusted. Shapes are two-dimensional enclosed spaces. They are things like circles, squares, and triangles. They are not things like spheres, cubes, or pyramids. That's a different element we'll talk about in a second. This is a very important difference. In anime, shapes that are irregular polygons with rounded corners are much preferred. Polygons are basically shapes with multiple lines, and those lines can be straight or slightly curved. The reason for the preference for round-edged polygons, and this ties into our next element of art, is because of form. Form is basically 3D shapes in art terms. Form is created from combined 2D shapes that create the illusion of a 3D image. To create dynamic animation, it's really important to exaggerate form. You're trying to convey the movement of objects in a 3D environment to make them feel alive, so it's crucial that you make these imaginary 3D shapes look like they're rotating, scaling, and changing with perspective in every single one of your frames, or else your animation will look boring. It's also pretty hard to convey 3D with rounder shapes. Look at both of these shapes and tell me which one looks more 3D and dynamic. Lastly, it's also way more time efficient to create polygons since you only have to worry about lines and not curves. Lines are basically point A to point B, so their movement is easier to keep track of, while curves require much more precision. You need to keep track of more points in a curve. Another way form is communicated in anime is through cell shading. Cell shading is a technique where shading isn't drawn in a gradual and softer way, but instead is drawn very sharply. It's really hard to line up soft shadows in animation because it's hard to tell where the shadow starts. But with cell shading, you can pretty much just outline the edge of the shadows, so that makes it super time efficient to use. Cell shading also prefers shadows to be polygons with rounded corners for the same reason as I stated before. Value is the lightness and the darkness of tones. A large contrast in values help establish depth and perspective in shading. In anime, values are usually defined by 2 to 4 colors. Sometimes you'll have one base color, one shading color, maybe one highlight color, and maybe the outline color for very dark shadows. These colors can lie anywhere on the value spectrum, and it's pretty rare to see more than 4 different values in a shading color palette, as that'll become more time consuming to add. There's not really a requirement to how far these values have to be from one another. Some animes have these values closer, and some like to exaggerate their values. It's really just up to the art style. These last two things aren't really that unique in anime, they're pretty much just universal to art things, so I'm just gonna skim through them. Space is the area in your canvas. It can either be negative or positive, which either means there's nothing in that area or there's something in that area. Based on what feeling you want to give, you can use the space to affect the composition of your canvas. For example, you can use a lot of negative space to invoke loneliness, or you can use a lot of positive space to invoke crowdedness. This is pretty much what any art medium does. Texture is how something looks or feels. Everything is usually drawn pretty flat in anime, and the only things that are ever textured are extreme things like scales, metals, and rocks. However, on people, everything is just consistently plain. So now that we've analyzed the style and elements of anime, let's put that stuff into practice. For this drawing, I'm going to draw my yellow and blue characters together. I've already drawn one character because I was practicing the style for this video, so let's draw the other one. First, I'm going to make a quick giant blob thing to get a general overview of how I want my character to be posed, and how I want their silhouette to look. Silhouettes are important because a good silhouette adds clarity to a drawing. Next, I'm going to sketch out my character with the help of the blob. You can use any pencil to sketch for this step. You don't specifically have to use the one that I'm using. You can use your favorite pencil or brush. It's important to remember you can do this process with your own personal style. You don't have to copy the style that I'm doing. You can draw your characters any way you want. The only important thing is how we line and render our drawings at the end. I feel like I use too many curves for the character's body, but it looks cute, so I don't really mind or think that'll really affect the end result. Onto line art. For this step, you do have to use the specific brush that I'm using. If you do want that brush, you can check out my Patreon, which is in the description. In this step, I'm going to try to emphasize some more angular shapes just so I can get closer to the anime style. However, once again, most of it is very curved and I kind of regret it, but oh well. The line art of the yellow character for some reason felt thicker than the blue characters, even though they're the same exact size. It could be that the yellow character is more compressed and smaller, but who knows. Also, as a side note, you don't have to make your line art completely black. I actually do end up making it like a lighter brown towards the end. So after lining the feet, I take a break from doing the line art because I hate line art, and I begin with coloring. For coloring, I wanted more control of the vibrancy of my colors, so I decided to take a path of just picking a shade color for each base color. It'll take more work, and maybe it'll end up looking more of like an illustration than animation, but I went with it anyways. I first colored the skin, and I try to find a color that's not too vibrant, but not too grayish either, and I'm actually happy with the color that I ended up choosing. While coloring, it's important to know that characters farther away from the screen are less detailed than ones close up. You usually just want to color the strongest shadows of characters that are farther away, or sometimes not even shade them at all. As you can tell, the face of the blue-haired character has probably more shading than the entirety of the yellow girl. So after I pretty much finished the yellow girl, I went back and fixed the mouth of the blue-haired girl. I didn't like the way her mouth was just circular, because that literally goes against what I was talking about earlier with shapes. So I just erase it and start over. For her mouth, I referenced Bakugo from Fortnite because this mouth has an angular style that I really like. The difficult part after drawing it though was positioning it. I don't know why, but it just looked wrong. So I just tilted it higher and it looked better. And then after that, I just draw an angry symbol for the character. So now that both of the characters are done, I have to move on and find a background and blend my characters into it. They're gonna fit in kind of awkward because usually when you're drawing anime characters onto a background, you find the background first or draw it and then you put on the characters, but in this case, I had to find the background to fit my characters. I didn't talk about earlier how anime studios blend their characters into their backgrounds because it didn't really fit in any section, but I'll give some good advice in this one. To blend your characters into the backgrounds, pick a color from the sky or environment, in this case I'm going to pick a green, and apply it to all your characters over a multiply layer. So I got my green and covered both of the characters in it, and I erased some holes into it to make it look like they were under some trees. Another thing that helps a lot is to duplicate the entire folder of your character, flatten that layer, and blur it by like 25 pixels, and set that layer to lighten. This adds some glowy blur to your characters, and it makes it look like light is being refracted from them. It makes it just look cuter and softer in general. Then I added a gradient of white coming from the top to both of the characters because, I mean, they were outside, so it just kind of makes sense. So after I finished with that, I was going to be done, but I thought to myself, you know what would make this feel more like an anime? Actually animating it. So I decided to put my flipnote DS skills to the test and do the most basic animation for the blue girl. I'm going to make her shout in a 3-frame segment like in this example. I thought it would be fun cause why not? So I lined up the blue girl and her shading so that I could easily transfer and move it into a new frame. So then I erased the jaw and started doing the hardest part, drawing the mouth open. This part was really hard, not because of the animation part, but because I literally couldn't draw the jaw in a way that could fit the character well. It would always look so off. So I just decided to draw it in an anatomically incorrect way, but it does look better than if I were to do it in a correct way. She just looked weird. Then I shifted some hair elements around so that it would bounce when she bounced as well. I didn't really reline anything, I just kind of rotated around parts of her hair. Then we move on to the second frame where it should be easier because we just really have to copy and paste and shift some parts and fix the shading guidelines. The reason I'm recoloring everything instead of shifting it around with the line art is because things actually look worse the more you keep rotating them. You'll see me fix some lines because their quality turns to shit. In this stage, animators actually turn off the anti-aliasing of lines and just fill in everything with a paint bucket tool, including the lines. This makes it so coloring is just pretty much a drag and drop process, but I do it the longer way and color everything by brush because I didn't want to fuck up my lines in case something went wrong. Coloring still was super easy, it was just a color in the lines book. After finishing the animation, I just added a few more filters just to blend in my characters better. I didn't like how saturated the background was because I didn't make it, I just found it in Clip Studio assets, but I added a gradient white filter like I did for the characters, and it made it look way better and more easy on the eyes. After rearranging the frames to make her shout, this is what I ended up with. Honestly, I think I did an amazing job even if the animation part wasn't too demanding or hard. I used to be a decent animator, but the only thing I ever did was flipnote animation like 5 years ago. Anyways, I hope that this video helped you with or inspired you to make your own fake anime scene. If it did, I would appreciate it if you subscribed or left a like on the video. It really helps me a lot when you guys do that kind of stuff. The animation file and brushes will be available on my Patreon if you're interested in checking those out, which is in the description below. If you like these types of videos and would love to see me do more art analysis on any kind of style like JoJo's or Persona, leave a comment telling me. Well, that's it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.